I have a unique way of watching movies since I have so many fucking movies. I use a rotation system and where I roll a movie from each format that I have, and that selects what I'll watch next for each format, and then I go through each format before the rotation begins again. That may not make much sense, but to me it does. And recently I've been rolling a lot of Star Trek, and honestly I've been getting into it, so I'm going to go through each Star Trek movie in order. Now this video won't cover every movie, rather I'll be going through the original series, then the next gen movies, then the ones from the Kelvin timeline, which is like the J.J. Abrams reboot for the uninitiated. Watching this much Trek has inspired me to watch the series, and I might do this for the TV series too, in small thought retrospectives about each. It won't be super in-depth, and it'll take a lot of time since I'm only watching them at work while I do office work, but I'll be working on this project slowly for the next couple of months. The original film actually started as an episode of Star Trek Phase 2, which was going to be a sequel series to Star Trek that ultimately got retooled into a movie. I won't go into too much depth with that, I just thought that was worth noting. Without further ado, Star Trek the original film series. The original Star Trek film, Star Trek the Motion Picture, was released in December of 1979 and was the first of the continuation series of Star Trek films for the original Star Trek series. It's definitely a unique film to say the least. Despite coming out in the shadow of the new kid on the block Star Wars, the film actually felt a lot more inspired by Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I kind of appreciate, especially since the sequels to this film definitely have more of a tone that's action-leaning. The movie is a bit odd, as not really much has changed from the last time we saw the Enterprise, a bit more than a decade ago. With our core characters essentially already in place, with the exception of Kirk, who was promoted to Admiral rather than being the captain like he was in the original series. He clearly wants back on the Enterprise and cons his way back into the captain's chair after a strange cloud entity is found while Kirk is aboard the Enterprise, which causes a bit of tension between Kirk and the Enterprise's current captain, William Decker. This eventually leads to the death of Decker's love interest, Lila, who is replaced with a weird space replica that Decker still wants to fuck. And they explore the cloud and find a satellite, Voyager 6, which basically became sentient. And then Decker has this weird sex ritual with the satellite and the day is saved. Look, I don't understand Star Trek and I probably didn't understand this movie, but honestly it's pretty kick-ass. While everybody from the original series has moments in this film, it's really Kirk and Deckard's show. A lot of the visuals rival the top sci-fi from the day, including its inspiration 2001: A Space Odyssey. The glowing space vagina looks pretty awesome, and when Mr. Spock is floating through space to explore it, I was pretty impressed. It's a lot of optical tricks that you couldn't really do with CGI, and frankly CGI doesn't have the same effect if we look at more modern movies. The character drama is okay, and as an unseasoned Trekkie, I still felt I understood the characters, though I feel I'll understand the characters a little better as I watch the show. That said, William Shatner as Kirk is electric and iconic. And in this movie, I felt him really putting in an effort, too, which made his character shine even more. Overall, this film isn't for anyone, I understand that, but I personally really enjoyed what I saw. The Wrath of Khan is also a pretty amazing movie, but it's a lot different than the first. Basically, Khan, a character from the original series, wants revenge on Kirk for some shit that happened in the TV show. He wants a device being made called Genesis, a device which can revive dead planets and create life. Kirk and Khan get into an epic ship battle, crippling both the Enterprise and the commandeered spacecraft Reliant, which causes a stalemate. Khan is ultimately mortally wounded, but launches Genesis, which would fuck up the Enterprise. However, in the nick of time, Spock sacrificed himself to fix the ship, allowing the crew of the Enterprise to escape. I like this movie a lot. It's a different flavor from the motion picture, but it's nearly as good in my opinion. It doesn't look as stunning to me, but again, we see a different side of Kirk, and the expanded role of Spock is cool, with his sacrifice being pretty heartbreaking. The space battles are intense, and it's seemingly the first time the crew of the Enterprise takes a close and personal loss. Star Trek III: The Search for Spock is pretty meh and lives in the shadow of the much more iconic Wrath of Khan. With weaker villains, a much quicker plot, it also relies too heavily on the last film, failing to stand on its own in any meaningful sense. The plot takes place soon after Khan, with the crew of the Enterprise, depressed by the loss of Spock, until a new hope arises. Kirk's son and Saavik, a lieutenant on the Enterprise, go to the Genesis planet created by Khan and discover that Spock is revived as a teen with no memory. This asspull leads Krug, a Klingon commander, to the planet to try to get the Genesis weapon. Kirk's son dies and the crew of the Enterprise blow up the Enterprise to murder like 5 Klingons. They beam down to Genesis and Kirk fights Kirk while the rest of the crew saves Spock. Kirk kills his ass and the day is won. Not only does this film undercut the ending of Wrath of Khan, it also relies too heavily on that film. This film really doesn't stand on its own. While there is some contextualizing stock footage of the film, it can't exist in a vacuum like the previous 2 entries. I barely know anything about Star Trek, and those films work just fine. That is the core problem with this film. Not to mention, Kirk kinda sucks. He just kinda shoehorned in and doesn't get enough to do. Christopher Lloyd's performance is alright, don't get me wrong, I just think Kirk as a villain is underutilized and kinda thrown in. It's also kinda laughable how they blew up the Enterprise to kill like 5 guys. It seemed like such a waste. Not only plot-wise, but also for the context that it was a villain that would feel weak even in an episode of the TV series. Overall, the film's okay, but pretty skippable. My god, this film is weird, but I love it. The film is a bizarre direct sequel to Star Trek 2 and 3, in which the crew, after saving Spock, attempt to head home and hear whale calls that basically convince them if they don't time travel to save the whales from extinction, the whole world would get fucked up. So that's what they do, they time travel to save the whales. I really liked the fish out of water feel, pun intended, of this movie. The cast in the 20th century was really fun, and I think for the first time the whole cast kinda has something to do. They time travel back to a time that is very non-Star Trek, with lots of paranoia and hate, so seeing the characters interact with that was interesting and at times hilarious. I like that the cast broke up and everyone had something to do, too. The other films felt very Kirk and Spock heavy, which this does too, don't get me wrong, but it does a better job of giving the rest of the cast crucial roles. Overall, I really enjoyed this, not as much as the first 2, but significantly more than 3. After the destruction of the Enterprise and Kirk's demotion to captain, Kirk is again piloting the Enterprise, but this time the newest version of the Enterprise A. Basically, Spock's long-lost brother wants to find God on some planet. The Shakari and his brother captured the Enterprise. Anyways, shit happens and they meet Marlon Brando from Superman, and Spock's brother merges with him or some shit. It's basically a really garbage version of the motion picture. It's weird but also lame and cheap compared to what came before. It has moments, but it's mostly just lame, honestly. It certainly could be better. The direction by Shatner is nothing special, however it's not bad either. It's all in all pretty meh. Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country follows the Federation as it nears a peace treaty with the Klingons. Kirk is accused of assassinating the Chancellor of the Klingons and is sentenced to a prison camp. However, he was framed and the Enterprise needs to rescue him and clear his name to continue the peace talks between the Federation and the Klingons. The film is good and has a great conclusion that is a cute way to retire Star Trek's original cast. It's the most basic film, but it's also fun, brief, and to the point. It's kind of dumb at points and yet also kind of political, which is an interesting balance, I suppose. And while there are villains, it's not so black and white like these occasionally end up being. It's a good send-off to the original cast with a decent movie surrounding it. Overall, I enjoyed the original films. There's certainly ups and downs, but they're very cinematic while preserving that Star Trek feel. The core cast is on point, and they're enjoyable watches. I know this was a short video, but I just wanted to say basic thoughts on each film. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll be back with some more Star Trek very soon.